Most times, I can get a pretty solid idea of what a shoe is all about by the end of a first run. But sometimes, a shoe gives some mixed messages and a couple more runs are required. This is the Saucony Ride 15, and these are my first impressions after my second run. .46 miles, 9 minutes per mile on average, and 130 beats per minute today. Going for a nice and easy run for my second time in the Saucony Ride 15. Now, before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I bought myself. No one sent it to me or is paying me to make this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Ride 15 after my second run. First, let's go over some specs on this shoe. This is a 35 millimeter stack height shoe with an 8 millimeter drop, giving us 27 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot, making this a relatively tall shoe for a daily trainer, which is what this Ride 15 is supposed to be. In the midsole, we have Saucony's PWRRRUN. Now, over the course of the past year, I've reviewed a variety of Saucony shoes, and we've seen PWRRRUN PB is their premier foam, and then PWRRRUN Plus, which is in shoes like the Triumph series. This is PWRRRUN, which is kind of like, if you want to think of them as like good, better, best, this is the good in that tier. There is an insole that is made out of PWRRRUN Plus, and what PWRRRUN Plus is a material that looks very Boost like. It has that kind of beaded material look to it, and it responds very similarly. So this is kind of like the main thing that you're stepping on that is going to give that softness sensation. Moving to the outsole, we have a lot of exposed foam here and just some very minimal strips of rubber. But if you take a look at those strips of rubber a little bit more carefully, the rubber placement there is actually quite deep. So there isn't a lot of rubber, but at the same time, there is, if that makes sense. Moving to the upper, we see a lot of changes. The shoe has always been a really hot shoe, a really puffy shoe. In the 15, things are much more streamlined, which for those of you who have summer approaching for your running, you're definitely going to appreciate. There's a mesh in the toe box, which is nice and comfy and has plenty of room. The shape and design reminds me a lot of an Endorphin Speed, so I'm really happy to see that some of the design cues from some of Saucony's more higher end shoes are finally starting to trickle down into some of the daily training shoes. In the tongue, it's a lot more restrained. Gone is all the puffiness from the rides that I remember from years past, and now we have a fairly normal standard daily trainer tongue. If anything, it's a little bit on the not that padded side, which is something that I'm absolutely enjoying because I just really dislike having a bunch of puffiness in the tongue because it just ends up being a sweat sponge in the summer. Moving back to the heel cup, that restraint is still carried through all the way to the back parts of the ankle and the heel, parts that are going to be actually touching your foot. So I'm definitely appreciating the restraint, but there is a very solid little heel cup in the back here. So there is a bit of rigidity to help keep the foot in place. All this comes in at a total weight of 8.8 ounces or 249 grams. So what was it like for me to run in this shoe? I had two kind of very different experiences with the shoe. The first one, I didn't love the shoe all that much. It felt to me very much like a stability shoe in kind of like neutral shoe clothing, because there isn't anything that kind of jumps out at me as like a stability element. A lot of times on Saucony shoes, they will kind of mold and play around with the midsole, so that way there's extra firmness kind of underneath the arch. I'm not really seeing a lot of that visually in the Ride 15, but on my first run in it, I definitely felt a lot of it, and it felt like there was just kind of a lot going on underneath the arch and like underneath the ankle, and so it just felt like there was a lot of things kind of not poking, but kind of like pushing up and putting pressure in areas that my foot didn't appreciate, and it led to a lot of initial foot fatigue. Add to that the fact that it felt like a very tall shoe that didn't have a lot of give. The whole point of having a very tall stack height is that you're going to combine that with a mushy foam, so that way there's a lot of room for the foam to work and absorb impact and then decompress and kind of give some of that spring back to your foot as you're going onto your next stride. This shoe felt very firm to me, and I just really felt like it was fighting me on a lot of levels, which in some ways is very characteristically Ride. There's always been a little bit of a battle and a tension between me and a Ride shoe, but it was always something that we're ultimately able to find some compromise. For me on this first run, I had a really hard time with it, and I wasn't sure that that was going to happen. I did appreciate the fact that it was very breathable and then it wasn't a hot shoe. And so like that was like the big plus side, and I was worried that that was going to be the only nice thing that I was going to be able to say about the shoe. Because when I took it for some strides on my first run, I had it up to a little bit of a faster speed just to see how the shoe would respond to a little bit of a pace change. And I found it to be really disappointing. I felt like it felt a little bit groggy, and I felt like it was almost like a little bit laggy in terms of like when I was giving it an input and kind of the response I was getting back from the shoe. So I felt like there was just a lot of disconnect with me and the shoe running those strides. The one thing that kind of like had me thinking, all right, maybe I still do need to give this shoe another shot though, is the fact that like after the strides, the shoe seemed to feel much better. It didn't feel quite as kind of like clunky. It didn't quite feel as firm. And so I thought, all right, maybe this is a situation where if not some break-in, which I don't really feel like shoes should have break-in in 2022. I feel like a shoe should feel pretty much how it's intended to feel right out of the box. Or maybe it's me, I did have a really hard workout the day before, so I usually try to avoid reviewing a brand new shoe the day after a workout, but you know, I was feeling good. I felt like it would be all right. I had really high hopes for the Ride 15, and so I thought all those things put together that it would kind of work out, but that wasn't the case. So I chalked it up to like kind of those several factors and decided I would give it another try. So I waited a couple more days. I did have another long run in there and another workout, but I spaced it out. Yesterday I didn't run at all. I just spent 90 minutes on the bike. So legs are a lot, I'm not going to say fresh, but they're feeling much better than they were the last time I put the shoes on. And I'm happy to report that my experience was much better. Not completely different, but much better. It still felt like there was a lot of stuff happening in the heel, and I still kind of have the sensation that this is more like an endorphin shift without all the like stability armor that's on it, rather than it being like a more comfortable Kinvara, which is kind of more of what I was hoping that this would be. But the foam didn't feel quite as firm to me anymore, and so I definitely appreciated it. But I still felt like I was kind of like fighting through just a little bit, but in that kind of like somewhat charming, familiar way that the Ride 15 kind of tends to disagree with me. For a long part of the run, I felt like the shoe was a bit slappy, like I wasn't rolling, I wasn't bouncing on it right. I just felt like I was kind of hitting the ground kind of awkwardly. So it took a little while for me to get into a rhythm with it. I did hit the turnaround today, and I'm not sure what it was, but suddenly I felt like I was finally getting into a rhythm with the shoe. And from that point on, it was just cruise control. It was really nice. It reminded me in really good ways of the Ride shoes that I had run in the past and had enjoyed. It reminded me, I got a lot of good positive memories of the EverRun that the Ride used to be built on, and I really felt like I was enjoying the shoe. I enjoyed the feel of it, the fit, the upper I could appreciate even more because the Ride underfoot was that much more comfortable. And so I just think that it kind of took my body like a minute to kind of like reacquaint itself with the Ride, a little bit longer than I would expect. But, you know, I feel like a shoe that I've had history with before, like the Ride, kind of gets the benefit of the doubt in that sense. Now, the one thing that this shoe had me thinking was that, like, I wonder why the Ride 15 isn't made out of PWRRUN Plus and instead is still made out of PWRRUN. I understand the PWRRUN in shoes like the Kinvara or its kind of like trail cousin, the PWRRUN. It makes a little bit more sense there, as those shoes are intended for a little bit more speed, where this kind of a little bit of extra firmness is going to be appreciated a bit more in those specific use cases. But for a shoe that is supposed to be a daily trainer that's supposed to just soak up the miles, I think I'd love to see what this shoe looks like in PWRRUN Plus. Maybe it doesn't need to still maintain that 35 millimeter stack height, because I think that's pretty close to what the Triumph 19 is, but something that's like kind of like a Triumph 19 Lite, where it's that material, but just a little bit less of it. I think that's something that I'd like to see, so that way I have all PWRRUN Plus that I'm running on, and not just PWRRUN with a PWRRUN Plus insole. But maybe that's just me, and maybe that's coming, who knows? I don't have any inside information on that. But for now, what we have is this PWRRUN version of the Saucony Ride 15. And so far, I'm starting to like it. We'll see how things go. Hit the subscribe button so you can see how this shoe ultimately ends up at the end of my time with it, which will be 100 miles. So if you have any questions about the Saucony Ride 15, put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do over on my Kofuzi Run Club channel, Monday through Friday, right here on YouTube. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?